Ano yung verbatim? No? So, auditing is a systematic process of objectively obtaining and evaluating evidences regarding assertions about economic actions and events to ascertain the degree of correspondence between those assertions and established criteria and communicating the results to interested users. So, minsan pag iniba na yan, iba na yung magiging sagot, hindi auditing. So, babasahin natin ng maigi. Tulad nung lumabas sa exam, di ba? Yung lumabas sa exam, akala natin auditing yung definition, but it only refers to financial statement audit, which is also known as examination of the financial statements. Yun naman yung definition naman nun, examination of financial statements. So akala natin full audit siya, limited lang siya into FS audit. So be careful, always be careful kapag magsasagot tayo ng auditing theory kasi medyo tricky yung mga exam. So next meeting, napag-aralan natin yung types of audit saka external types of auditors. Napag-aralan din natin yung professional standards, nandun natin napag-aralan yung GAAS, PSA, PSQC, PSRE, PSAE, PSRS, Philippine Auditing Practice Notes. Yan. Okay, dati ang tawag dyan, Philippine Auditing Practice Statement. So, practice notes na tawag ngayon. And then AASC alert. Yung PSQC, PSQM na yung tawag ngayon. Napag-aralan din natin yung ano yung mga responsibility ni auditor as to errors, fraud, and non-compliance. So, na-distinguish din natin ano ba yung error, ano yung mga example ng errors, ano yung mga example ng fraud, ano ba yung fraud, ano rin naman yung non-compliance. Napag-aralan din natin the last time yung audit process. So yung audit process sa initial process pa lang ng audit, whether to accept a client or hindi. And then napag-aralan natin during the last part of our meeting no mga nakaraan, pag-aralan natin yung audit planning. So sa audit planning, this is the first standard of field work. So napapakinggan pa po ba ako, class?
Yes po.
Alright. So this is the first standard of field work kung saan yung standard of field work, di ba yung mnemonics is PI. So planning, internal control consideration, and then evidential matter. So may covered na standards, auditing standards for audit planning is PSA 300. Also known as Planning and Audit of the Financial Statement. Dito sa PSA 300, dito natin makikita ano ba yung objective ng auditor sa pagpaplano ng audit. So, ano yung objective as per PSA 300? So that the auditor will perform an audit in an effective manner. Merong requirement under PSA 300. Una doon, involvement ng engagement team partner. So na-discuss na natin to the last time, di ba? So one example, meron sa isang engagement team, meron tayong iba-ibang miyembro, di ba? So for example, kayo, nag-work kayo sa SGV and company. So meron tayong engagement partner, and then audit manager, audit supervisors, o kaya audit senior associates, and then mga audit junior associates naman. So, syempre, if you will work in an auditing firm, ganun yung inyong designation. So, you will start as an associate, either junior or senior, and then mag-level up ka into audit supervisor or audit assistant manager. Then, you will, as you go higher, di ba? Ultimately, magiging ka ng partner or engagement partner. So aside from considering the involvement of engagement team members, bakit kaya natin kailangan yung i-consider yung involvement ng engagement team members? Kasi syempre dapat ma-consider din natin yung competence ng bawat members ng engagement team. Syempre, kailangan kapag mag-audit tayo ng isang client, dapat meron ng knowledgeable na yung mga engagement team, bawat members ng engagement team. Otherwise, makakadagdag yon sa time para i-audit yung client. Kasi ite-train mo pa yung buong engagement team kasi wala silang idea regarding sa industry nung bagong client. Wala silang idea kung paano i-audit itong bagong client kasi wala talaga silang background information o kaya technical training and proficiency pagdating sa ganitong specialized industry ng client. So, syempre, tayo bilang isang engagement partner or audit partner, we have to consider the competence of our members of the engagement team. All right. So, next is the preliminary engagement activity. So, dapat i-consider din natin to sa audit planning. Why do we need to consider it? Kasi dito natin makikita or maa-assess yung quality control or quality management system ng isang auditing firm. Compliant ba with the relevant ethical requirements ang isang engagement team or the whole audit firm, or compliant ba sila with the quality control process, diba? Under PSQM number 1 or PSA 220. And then syempre, we also have to establish the terms of engagement as per PSA 210 or the terms of engagement. So napag-aralan na natin ito, 'di ba? Doon sa acceptance ng new sa recurring clients. Ano ba yung mga details ng isang engagement letter or engagement proposal? So there's no need for me to discuss it further. All right. So let's close this preliminary engagement. So let's go now in the planning activities. So isa ito sa requirement ng PSA 300 para makakonduct nga talaga ng effective audit ang isang auditor. So yun yung ikatlo niyang kino-consider, planning activities. So bakit dapat i-consider ng auditor yung planning activities? Kasi meron siyang responsibility to design an overall audit strategy. So that is according to PSA 300. So paano masasabi na nakapag-design ang isang auditor ng magandang overall audit strategy? Una na dyan, dapat niyang i-consider yung deep understanding or thorough understanding ng environment ng client niya or the client itself. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class? Can you still hear me?
Yes po.
Alright, ayan. So, paano natin masasabi? We have to understand fully the nature of the business. Ano ba yung nature ng operation ng business? Nagtitinda ba sila? Nagmamanufacture? Into resell ba sila? Into service concern ba sila? Merchandising? So, doon natin makikita, doon natin mas mapag-aaralan, doon natin maiintindihan because of the idea or the concept of the nature of the business. So, isa yan sa dapat kino-consider. So, just like what I have told you before, meron ako isang client nasa tourism, travel and tourism industry siya. So, every day meron siyang 3,000 sales transactions. So, imagine niyo 3,000 sales transaction multiplied by 30 days multiplied by 12 months. So, sa isang taon, meron siyang volume ng sales transaction na 1,080,000 sales transaction. Transaction pa lang yan, hindi pa yan yung peso value. So, kung limited lang yung engagement team natin, hindi nila kakayanin i-audit lahat ito. Diba? So, kahit magtanda kayo ng audit sampling, dahil malaki yung volume ng transaction, malaki din yung audit samples na kukunin ninyo. Ganun din sa collection transaction. Kasi yung sales transaction, iba pa yon. Collection transaction, iba pa. Disbursement transaction, iba rin. So, maraming klase ng transaction tayong pwedeng i-audit. So, the larger the transaction that a client or an entity has, syempre, i-consider natin yon bilang isang engagement partner na baka kulangin tayo ng oras kapag limited lang yung members ng engagement team na kasama. So, syempre, magdadagdag tayo ng tao. At syempre, kapag magdadagdag kayo ng tao, ay consider nyo rin yung cost-benefit relationship. So sabihin natin, malaki nga yung client ninyo pero ang billing nyo lang sa kanila 100,000. So hindi siya practical na magbibill ka ng 100,000 pesos tapos ang ipapadala yung audit associates doon sa company 10, 'di ba? So 10 tapos 100,000 pesos lang yung matatanggap nung auditing firm, medyo lugi sila. So consider nila yung cost benefit relationship. So syempre, kapag maliit lang din yung yung fee, maliit lang onti lang din yung yung dapat cost na ma-incur, 'di ba? Pero syempre, yung bill na yan, yung amount ng fee, hindi yan yung pinaka main priority ng isang auditor. Kasi yung pinaka main priority niya is to conduct the audit properly and effectively. Ayan. Alright. So, kaya kino-consider natin yung cost-benefit relationship. Ayan. Okay. Tapos ano pa? Yung extent to which components are audited by other auditors. Kasi meron tayong ibang PSA standards. Ayan. So, lagay ko dito. Yung extent to which components are audited by other auditors, meron kasi tayong ibang auditing standards like PSA 600. So ano yung PSA 600 na yan? Yung PSA 600 is a standard on the use, it is an auditing standard on the use of work of another auditor. So imagine ninyo, meron palang standard na nagko-cover na pwede palang gumamit ng work ng isang auditor ang isa pang auditor. Pero syempre, it is a call of the professional judgment of an auditor kung gagamitin niya yun or hindi. Kasi kung ikaw yung auditor at napaka-conservative mo, sasabihin mo, hindi ko alam kung paano yung audit procedure na ginawa ninyo, hindi ko alam kung na-detect ninyo ng maayos yung errors and fraud, so hindi ako makakapag-rely diyan sa work ninyo. So, just like what I've said, it is a professional judgment ng isang auditor kung gagamitin niya yung work ng isang auditor ulit. Sabihin ninyo, kailan nangyayari ito? One example, pag nagpalit ng auditor, dati si SGV and Company, next year si client, sabi niya, ang gusto ko naman maging auditor si KPMG. So, syempre si KPMG, mag-i-issue siya ng financial statement. Pag nag-issue siya ng financial statement, for example, 2021, yung 2020, in-audit na yun ni SGV eh. Pero ipe-present niya kasi yung 2020 ka-compare ng 2021. So, depende kay KPMG kung gagamitin niya yung audit report ni SGB noong 2020 or i-re-audit niya ulit yung buong 2020. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes po. Yes po.
Okay. Tapos, pag-aaralan din natin yung component auditor. Meron ding kasing tinatawag na component auditor. Ang component auditor, ito ay kapag group yung ino-audit. Sabihin natin, ang isang parent company may mga subsidiary siya. So, di ba napag-aralan niyo yun sa PFRS 3, yung business combination, saka PFRS 10, consolidation of financial statements. So, dahil may parent-subsidiary relationship, dahil separate naman talaga legally ang subsidiary, meron silang kalayaan mamili ng kanilang auditor. Sabihin natin, yung subsidiary 1, ang kanyang auditor ay si Isla Lipana or PricewaterhouseCoopers. Yung si subsidiary 2 naman, ang auditor niya is si KPMG. Tapos ang auditor naman ni parent company ay si Deloitte. So si Deloitte, siya yung component auditor. Bakit siya naging component auditor? Kasi ang kanyang i-audit ay isang component or consolidated financial statement. So pag kinonsolidate yung financial statement, both subsidiary saka parent, i-consider ni component auditor kung gagamitin ba niya yung work nung auditors ng mga subsidiary companies nung ino-audit niyang parent company. So, yan po yun. Di ba meron tayong successor auditor, predecessor auditor, meron din tayong tinatawag na component auditor. Pero pag-aaralan natin yan as we go deeper with the subject. Ayan. Tapos ano pa yung mga kino-consider? Reporting currency to be used, need for statutory audit of standalone FS. Pag standalone FS, ito yung mga financial statement na ng isang entity, 'di ba? So, for example, si parent company sa si subsidiary company, yung financial statement ni subsidiary company, stand-alone financial statement niya 'yon. Pero pag pinagsama mo na yung FS nung dalawa, nung parent pati subsidiary, consolidated or group financial statement na yung tawag doon. Ano pa? Availability of the client's financial data. We have to consider this as well kasi hindi tayo makakapag-start ng audit kung wala tayong available financial data na ma-audit. Yun naman kasi yung purpose ng audit natin, di ba? I-audit yung financial statement. So dapat una natin yan titignan. Prior yung historical figures ng financial statement ng company. Nakukuha po ba? Nakakasunod po ba, class? Can you hear me, class? All right. Okay, so nakikinig naman yung mga estudyante ko. Okay, so let's move here. Ayan, extent of planning. So, bakit natin kailangan i-consider yung extent nung audit plan? Bakit natin kaya kailangan i-consider yung extent ng audit plan? Anyone from the class? Why do we need to consider the extent of audit planning? Yes. Yes, John Eric.
Kasi sir, magkakaiba po yung kumbaga yung sa size po nung bawat entity po. Bali kung malaki pong entity yun, syempre mas malaking extent din po yung kailangan gagawin. Then kapag mas maliit po, ganun din po, mas maliit din.
That's correct, no? So tama yun. Tama si John Eric. So yung extent ng audit planning, depende yan doon sa entity or sa client na ino-audit mo. Siyempre, kung malaki yung audit client na i-audit mo, dapat mas malaki rin yung sakop nung extent ng i-audit mo. So, siyempre, pagpaplanuhan mo yan, yung audit mo, kapag malaki yung client, you have to consider the size, 'di ba? Syempre, dahil medyo malaki, may mga branches siya all over the Philippines, hindi mo naman pwedeng i-audit lang yung head office. Dapat pumunta ka rin doon sa iba-ibang branches. Kaya yung mga ibang auditors, kapag may medyo malaki yung client nila, nagpapadala pa ng mga audit associates sa iba-ibang lugar. Kasi syempre, i-audit rin nila yon, di ba? Mag-inventory count doon sa factory plant number 1 sa Luzon, factory plant sa Visayas, factory plant sa Mindanao. So, syempre, kapag kino-consider natin yung extent of planning, we have to consider the size of the entity. So, tama dyan si John Eric. Ano pa? Complexity. Ayan. So, complexity of the operations. Complexity of the operations and organizational structure of the client. So, syempre, 'di ba, may mga client kasi na very complicated yung operations nila or yung organizational structure nila medyo malaki. Sabihin natin maliit lang yung entity, yung size niya, yung size ng entity, pero napaka-complicated ng operation. So you have to consider that as well. So tulad ng sinabi ko sa inyo, 'di ba, sa ating professional standard, merong i-issue na bagong standard, auditing standard for less complex entities. So hindi ba siya lumalabas? Pero maganda iyon kasi kapag lumabas na iyon, maapektuhan yung extent of audit planning dahil meron ng applicable standards or auditing standards for less complex entities. All right. So ano pa? Auditor's experience. So, kailangan din natin i-consider yung experience mismo ng auditor doon sa entity mismo. Yung auditor's experience with the entity and knowledge of the client's business. So, 'di ba katulad nung sinabi natin kanina, kailangan nating intindihin yung nature ng business pati yung environment ng business ng ating client. So, kasama kasi 'yon sa kino-consider natin for audit planning. Ano pa? Materiality. So, kino-consider din natin yung materiality. Mamaya pag-uusapan natin yung materiality. And then last one, extent of other documentation. Ayan. So, syempre, during the conduct of your audit, nagdo-document tayo bilang auditor. We have to document everything dahil kailangan natin na meron tayong working paper. Otherwise, wala tayong basis to form a conclusion doon sa ating gagawing report sa financial statement. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class? Nagigets po ba?
Yes po.
All right. Okay. So, next is importance of audit. Why do we need, bakit importante ang audit planning? Why is it important for auditors to conduct an audit plan? Ano sabi ng PSA 300? Una, it helps ensure that appropriate attention. Yeah. So it helps ensure that appropriate attention is devoted to important areas of the audit. Bakit? Kasi syempre, kapag nagkakandak tayo ng audit, minsan may kino-consider tayo na material transactions. Kapag hindi tayo nagplano, may possibility na makaligtaan natin iyon. Na yun yung pinaka-importante natin na dapat i-audit. Bakit hindi natin nagawa? So, kapag may audit plan, naka-set na doon na this phase of audit is of high importance, so dapat gawin. No? So, syempre, dahil iba-iba ng industry, sabihin natin, mga banks. Yung banks, iba-iba, dahil nasa banking industry, ano kaya yung pinaka-ino-audit natin doon? Sa tingin nyo, class, ano yung pinaka-magandang i-audit doon sa mga banks and financing industries? Class, do you have any idea?
Financial instruments po.
Financial instruments, di ba? Tulad ng cash, loan agreements, loan contracts, ano pa ba, letters of credits, yan yung pinaka-importante doon. Sa manufacturing company, ano yung pinaka dapat ninyong high importance na dapat i-audit? Patingin ninyo. Class. Manufacturing. Ano bang ginagawa
Inventory po, sir.
That's correct. So tama si Sofia, inventory, 'di ba? So tama si John Eric dun sa banks, financial instrument, Sofia tama sa manufacturing, inventory. So kaya importante yung audit planning kasi makikita natin ano ba yung pinaka-importante na dapat i-audit. Kasi kung hindi mo siya na-audit, walang saysay yung pag-audit mo dahil yun yung pinaka-importante. Ano pa yung importance ng audit? Identify the potential problems. Yan. Identify the potential problems. Ano pa? Allows the work to be completed. Sorry, yan. Allows the work to be completed expeditiously. Ano pa? Assist the proper assignment and coordination of work. Dahil nga may audit plan, malalaman natin saan ba naka-assign si auditor associate number 1, si auditor associate number 2. Di ba tulad ng pinag-usapan natin the last time, meron tayong ginawang engagement team, di ba? Ito, for example, si associate number 1, yung kanyang focus is audit of cash. Si associate number 2, PPE sa kanya. Si associate number 4, payables. Isang associate, long-term payable. So, kino-consider natin yan, class. Ano pa? It facilitates, ayan. So, it facilitates the effective and efficient conduct of the audit. Dahil nga meron kang audit plan, meron kayong guidelines, paano yung flow ng audit process. So yan yung importance ng audit. Ito naman yung extent or dapat natin i-consider para sa audit planning. Okay, so tapos na tayo dyan, no? Ayan. Next is understanding the entity's internal control. So, kailangan natin intindihin yung entity's internal control, although there is a separate topic for this. Pero pahapyawan na natin. Kasi bakit? It helps the auditor to check for the possible risk. Yung internal control mismo, it will help the external auditor to check the possible risk. Sino ba yung gumawa ng internal control policies? Sino yung gumagawa ng internal control policies, class?
Management po.
That's correct. Si management ang gumagawa ng internal control policies. Sino naman ang nag-check kung effective ang internal control policies? Sinong auditor?
Internal auditor po.
That's correct. No? So si internal auditor ang nag-check kung effective ba or efficient yung internal control policies in place. Ngayon, dahil si internal auditor yung nag-check, meron siyang working file. Diba? Meron siyang working file and report na ginagawa. Nakukuha po ba? Hindi naman pwedeng sitting pretty lang si internal auditor doon. Sasabihin niya, ay internal auditor ako, may lisensya ako, CIA license ako. May certificate pala ako. Yan, di ba? With certified internal auditor. Hindi naman pwedeng ganun yun. Kailangan magtatrabaho din si internal auditor. So, meron siyang working file. Ngayon, babalikan natin dito. Balikan natin yung ayan. Okay. Ayan. Nasaan na ba tayo? Ayan. Dito pala. Ito. Ayan. So, ayan. Yung internal auditors, meron silang working file or report na sinasubmit sa management. Kung effective or efficient po ba yung internal control policies in place, set in place. Ngayon, tayo bilang external auditor, kaya natin kinoconsider yung internal control kasi maaari yung makatulong sa atin. Which it will also fall under PSA 600. So ano si PSA 600? Use on the work of another auditor. Dahil auditor si internal auditor, yung work niya pwedeng i-consider ni external auditor. Pero dahil nga lagi nating in-exercise yung professional judgment, it is a call on the part of the external auditor whether to use the work of another auditor sa pagkandak niya ng external audit. So, kung sa tingin nyo, kung ikaw yung auditor, sa tingin mo makakatulong sa iyo yung report na ginawa ng internal auditor, then pwede. No? So, added measure na gagawin mo, you have to assess or you have to validate kung ano yung nasa report ng internal auditor. Siyempre, sabihin ng internal auditor, okay, the internal control policies are still operating effectively and efficiently. So dahil ikaw ay external auditor and you are exercising your professional skepticism, hindi ka agad-agad maniniwala sa work ng internal auditor. You have to test if the internal control are really operating effectively and efficiently. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes po.
Alright, ayan. So, nandito na tayo sa pangalawa, understanding the entity's internal control. So, balik ulit tayo. Dahil nga ang internal control ay nakakatulong sa atin bilang external auditor para ma-assess yung possible risk kasi meron tayong mga tinatawag na business risk. Ano yung business risk na yon? Yung pinag-usapan natin the last time, business risk or uncertainties or risks that prevents the entity from achieving its goals or objectives. Diba? So risk came from the Latin word. Yeah, so risk came from the Latin word riscare or riscare, di ba? Which means to bear. Ibig sabihin, yung kaya mong tanggapin. Kaya pwede pala tayong tumanggap ng risk. Di ba? Kasi risk came from the Latin word riscare, which means to bear. So, sa atin bilang external auditor or kung internal auditor man tayo, meron tayong tinatawag na risk appetite. So yung risk appetite na yon depende sa atin bilang isang auditor. So it will boil down again sa professional judgment ng isang auditor. Kung kaya ba ninyo, bakit risk auditor? Risk appetite. Ayan. So kung kaya ba ng isang auditor na tanggapin yung ganito kalaking rate ng risk or ang kailangan lang ng isang auditor ay maliit na risk. Okay sa kanya yun. Pag medyo malaki na yung percentage ng risk, hindi niya na yon tatanggapin. Kailangan niya nang sagawa ng audit measures or control measures. So ayan po yun. Okay. So ngayon, sa business risk natin, meron tayong tinatawag na mga uncertainties. Which is, first one is inherent risk. Ano yung inherent risk? These are permanent risk or risks that cannot be prevented. So normally, inherent risks are 100%. Diba? So kung kayo yung auditor, 100% nyo na agad yung inherent risk kasi hindi yan natin kayang kontrolin. These are innate in nature, nag-i-exist na sila noon pa. So ready na lang sila na i-penetrate ang isang entity or isang business. So 100% palagi ang inherent risk. Well, control risk, ang control risk kasi nakadepende yan sa internal control ng company. Kapag ang internal control is good, kapag okay ang internal control, that means to say the control risk is low, 'di ba? Mababa ang control risk. Kapag hindi maganda ang internal control, then the control risk is very high. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class? Nagigets po ba?
Opo.
All right. So can you still see my screen? Medyo maliit po ba or malaki?
Sakto lang po.
Okay. Ayan. So, i-visualize natin if internal control is good, di ba? So, kapag internal control ay good daw, masaya ka ba or malungkot?
Masaya po.
Masaya. Di ba? Kung masaya, ang control risk ba mataas or mababa?
Mababa po.
Control risk is low. That's correct, no? So, tama po 'yun. So, if internal control is good, then the control risk is low. Medyo mababa ang control risk. But, if the internal control is bad, masaya ka ba or malungkot?
Malungkot.
Malungkot ka. Therefore, the control risk is high. So, nakukuha na natin, no? Ayan. So, syempre, kapag mababa ang control risk, ibig sabihin maganda ang internal control. Kapag maganda ang internal control, pag maganda ang internal control, sa tingin ninyo, yung audit risk ba yung audit risk, mataas ba or mababa? Ulitin ko, if internal control is good, then the control risk is low. Therefore, audit risk is high or low? Class. If internal control is good, then the control risk is low. Therefore, audit risk is high or low?
Low.
Low siya. Nakuha po ba? Kasi nga yung control risk is one of the audit risk. So, therefore, the audit risk is low. Kapag ang internal control is hindi naman okay, the control risk is high. Therefore, the audit risk is high as well. Nakukuha po ba? So, itong inherent risk sa control risk na to, these are normally within the function of the management. So, lagay natin dito. So, yan, within the function of the management. Yan. So, ayusin natin. Yan. So, within the function of the management pala itong inherent risk sa control risk. Ano naman yung function ng auditor? Diba? So, para malaman natin kung ano yung function ng auditor, we have to consider the materiality of the audit risk. So, consideration of materiality of audit risks. So, ito, kasama ito doon sa hinahanap sa atin ng PSA 300 under audit planning. So, consideration of audit risk materiality. So, the formula for audit risk is this. Audit risk is equal to inherent risk multiplied by control risk multiplied by detection risk. So just like what I have said, control risk saka inherent risk ay function ng management. So function pala ng management ang inherent risk saka control risk. Pero normally, ang inherent risk, since it is innate in nature, nag-i-exist na talaga siya, tayo bilang auditor, kino-consider natin siya as 100%. Yung control risk, dahil function siya ng management, kailangan nating i-check yung internal control. Nakukuha po ba, class? Nakakasunod pa ba?
Yes po.
Yes po.
Yes. So kung maganda ang internal control, kapag maganda ang internal control, so sabihin natin mga nasa 20% lang. Diba? 20% lang ang control risk. Yan. Okay. Pero kapag medyo hindi maganda ang internal control, sabihin natin nasa 70% ang control risk. Nakukuha po ba? So yan yung assessment natin. So ina-assess natin yung control risk. Ay nasa 70% yung control risk kasi hindi maganda yung internal control nila. So, ayan, sorry. Ayan. Okay. Ngayon, kapag medyo mataas ang control risk, ano yung sabi ko kanina? Audit risk is also
High.
high, di ba? So, dahil mataas ang control risk, yung audit risk nyo rito is high. Di ba? Pero, ang audit risk dapat mini-maintain lang siya at the acceptable level. So, dapat nasa acceptable level lang siya, level of audit risk. So, normally, ang acceptable level of audit risk is nasa between 1% to 5% lang. So, yan lang yung acceptable level of audit risk. Dahil mataas ang control risk, mataas ang audit risk. Paano mo mapapababa ang audit risk? Meron tayong isang risk factor na controllable ng isang auditor. So, ang tawag doon ay detection risk. Kukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class? Nagigets po ba?
Yes po.
Alright. Ayan. So, okay na tayo ha. Meron tayo. Papalakihan ko pa siya. Ayan. Palakihan natin. Ayan. Inherent risk daw, 100%. Control risk, 70%. Therefore, the audit risk is high. Pero ano yung acceptable level lang ng audit risk? Between 1% to 5%. So kung yan yung acceptable level of audit risk natin, di ba? For example, gusto nyo lang na acceptable level ng audit risk is 5%. Kasi yan lang yung kaya natin bilang auditor. Hindi na natin kayang tanggapin kapag 6% ang audit risk. Medyo matindi na para sa atin yon. So therefore, ang assurance level natin must be 95%. So, para masabing yan yung assurance level natin. Pag sinabing assurance level, that is your level of reasonable assurance. Diba? Level of reasonable assurance rendered on the financial statement. Diba? Anong sabi ninyo? Pag nagbibigay kayo ng opinion on the financial statement, ano yung level ng assurance na binibigay ninyo? Reasonable assurance. Ano yung assurance level dito? 95%. Therefore, 5% is audit risk. So, kailangan ang audit risk nyo, i-maintain nyo lang siya by 5%. So, paano nyo siya mapapababa? By controlling the detection risk. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes po.
Yes po.
Yeah. So, by controlling the detection risk. So, paano ninyo mapapababa yung audit risk? Papababain nyo rin yung detection risk. Nakukuha po ba? Papababain nyo rin yung detection risk. Kasi, tignan natin, dito tayo. Layo muna tayo dito, class. Ayan. Inherent risk. Inherent risk, IR. Lagay natin. Control risk, CR. Detection risk, DR. Kapag mataas ang inherent risk, yan, inherent risk is high, therefore, the audit risk is also high. Kapag ang control risk is high, therefore, the audit risk is also high. So, para mapababa ninyo yung audit risk, kailangan yung detection risk must be low. Diba? Detection risk must be low para yung audit risk nyo nasa acceptable level. Must be in the acceptable level. So, yan ang inyong gagalawin, yung detection risk. So, balik ulit tayo dito. Ayan na. So, paano natin i-maintain ito na 5%? Ilang percent ng detection risk ang dapat nating i-maintain para ma-achieve yung 5% class? Ilang percent?
71%.
71%. So, let's try to compute. Ano yung formula? Audit risk is equal to inherent risk multiplied by control risk multiplied by detection risk. 71% results to 50% audit risk. So kung 71% yung detection risk mo, 50% yung audit risk, medyo malaki naman yung audit risk ninyo. So ano dapat ang detection risk?
7.14.
7.5. So let's try, no? 7.1%. Yan, that's correct. So 7.1% or 7% will be your detection risk. Yan. So in order to have a sufficiently acceptable level of audit risk. Okay, nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class? Nakakasunod po ba lahat?
Opo.
Okay. Ayan. So, now, na-identify na natin yung inherent risk. Na-identify na natin yung control risk. Ano naman yung detection risk? What is detection risk para sa inyo? What is detection risk para sa inyo, class? Yes, Nico Andre.
Yun yung risk na hindi makikita ni auditor yung mga material misstatements.
That's correct, no? So detection risk is the risk that an auditor will fail to detect errors, fraud, non-compliance that will result to material misstatement on the financial statement. So kung mataas yung detection risk, okay lang pala sa inyo, di ba? Sabihin natin kanina 71% yung detection risk. So okay lang sa inyo na ganoong level yung detection risk, hahayaan nyo na. Mag-audit lang ako, wala kang pakialam kung hindi ko makita yung error, fraud, saka non-compliance. Diba? Kasi ang okay sa inyo, yung i-audit nyo lang is 29%, 'di ba? 29% lang yung i-audit ninyo. 71% is audit risk. So yun po yun. Pero dahil ang inyong detection risk here is 7% or 7.1%, na-achieve ninyo yung acceptable level of audit risk na 5%. So sabihin natin, control risk is also 100%. Ilan dapat ang detection risk natin? So, to achieve acceptable level of audit risk. Ilang percent?
5% po.
5%. Nakuha po ba? Sabihin natin, control risk is 80%. Control risk is 80%. Ang gusto nyong level ng audit risk is 1% lang. Ilang percent ang detection risk ninyo para masabing ang audit risk is only 1%?
1.25.
1.25%. That's correct na. So, tama. So, to achieve an audit risk of 1%, you must have a detection risk o equivalent to 1.25%. So, tama po yun. Lagay natin dito. Ayan, 1.25%. That's correct. So, kayang-kaya na natin laruin yung audit risk level or audit risk materiality. So, syempre tayo bilang auditor, the lower the audit risk, the better. Syempre yan, yung range na yan, 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, depende yun sa inyong mga auditor. Kasi nga, professional judgment niyan at depende yan sa inyong risk appetite. Ayan. Okay? So, audit risk must be sufficiently low. So, lagay ko dito. Audit risk must be sufficiently low or acceptable. So, dapat daw pala sufficiently low and acceptable ang audit. Ano yun? Sorry. I'm so sorry. Ayan, 9. Sufficiently low and acceptable. Inherent risk, since it is based on nature and innate na siya, normally 100%. Pero function din siya ng management. So, function of management. So, lagyan natin dyan. Credit risk, control risk pala, sorry, not credit risk. Control risk is also function of the management. So, by checking the internal control policies. Audit detection risk is the function of auditor. Ayan, okay. So, tapos na tayo dito no, sa control, sa audit risk. So, kayang-kaya na natin. Kapag merong lumabas na question na ganyan, sabihin, audit risk must be at 1%. However, inherent risk is 100%, control risk is 80%. Magkano daw ang, ilang percent dapat ang detection risk? So, alam nyo nang computin, 1.25%. So, ganun din yun. Alright. So, we also need to consider the nature, extent, and timing of audit procedure. So, ano yung nature, extent, and timing? Ano yung nature, extent, and timing, class? Nature of audit procedures. Extent of audit procedures. And then, timing of audit procedures. Anyone? Ano yung nature? Nature of audit procedure. Yes, John Eric.
Yung nature of audit procedures po, yung effectivity po nung substantive procedure po nung gagawin sa audit.
Nature ng substantive procedure. All right. So, pwede rin yun, no? So, nature of the substantive procedure. That's correct. So, effectivity. Lagyan natin dyan. Ano naman yung extent of audit procedure? Ano yung extent of audit procedure, class? Do you have any idea?
Scope po.
It is the scope. Tama po yan. So, scope of audit. Diba? Ano naman yung timing? What is timing? Timing? What is timing? Timing refers to the length of time. Diba? So, kung paano i-audit. So, from the word itself, diba? Yan. Nature of audit procedure. So, palitin ko muna siya. The nature of audit procedure, just like what you've said, it is based on the effectivity ng audit na gagawin ninyo or audit procedure. So, syempre, the more effective the audit procedure, you are requiring more samples. Diba? You are requiring more samples, more audit evidences. Kapag extend naman yung scope ng audit. So, are you looking for small samples lang or large samples from a large population? Ayan po. And then length of time naman, are you conducting the audit at an interim period or year-end? Ayan, year-end period. So yan yung dapat natin i-consider. From the word itself, nature, extent, timing. So sabi nga, nature refers to effectivity, so more or less. Diba? More samples, more audit evidences, the effective the audit procedures you are conducting. Scope of audit, marami bang samples? Large samples ba yung kailangan mo? Or limited samples lang? Timing, are you conducting the audit at an interim period or at a year-end period? Ilagay natin siya dito, applying the audit risk model. So audit risk model. Ano ba yung audit risk model natin, class? Audit risk is equal to, ano yung class?
Inherent risk times control
Inherent
risk.
risk. Ayan, inherent risk multiplied by
Control risk.
control risk multiplied by
Detection risk.
detection risk. Ayan, detection risk. Ayan, so lagay natin dyan. Audit risk must be sufficiently low or dapat acceptable level lang, diba? Sufficiently low or acceptable level. Normally, inherent risk is 100%. Control risk, depende yan sa internal control. Naalala po ba?
Yes
Naalala
po.
po ba, class? Diba depende siya sa internal control? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes po.
Ayan. So, nakadepende siya sa internal control. So, if the internal control, if the internal control is good, therefore, dapat ka ba mag-conduct ng test of control? Ulitin ko na lang ulitin ko para mas maganda. If internal control is good, masaya ka ba? Masaya ka ba, class?
Yes po. Yes po.
Yes. Kapag masaya ka, control risk is high or low?
Low.
Low.
Control risk is low. At kapag low ang control risk, dapat ka bang mag-conduct ng test of control? Ite-test mo ba yung control? Yan yung sinasabi ko. Ite-test mo ba yung control kapag ang control risk is low? Yes or no? Anyone from the class? Anyone from the class?
Yes
Sige
po.
po, ulitin natin. Kapag ang internal control ay okay, maganda, masaya kayo. Kasi ang control risk ay mababa. Kayo bilang auditor, magpe-perform ba kayo ng test of control? In Filipino, iti-test nyo ba yung control? Yes or no?
Yes
Yes
po.
po.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
The answer is yes. Nakuha po ba? Bakit? So you perform test of control. Why? Bakit natin i-perform yung test of control? Kasi nga, yung control risk is mababa. Para masabi natin, masatisfy natin yung sarili natin na, oo nga, yung control risk is low nga talaga. Kasi you conduct test of control. Pero kung hindi kayo nag-conduct ng test of control, ibig sabihin, naniniwala kayo doon sa ginawa ng internal auditor. Diba? Kasi yung work ng internal auditor, saka saka yung internal control itself is the function of management. Kasi nga, yung control risk is function of management. So, maniniwala ba kayo agad doon sa function ng management? Yes or no? Maniniwala ba kayo?
No.
Sir.
No,
No.
po.
Hindi kayo maniniwala. That's why you need to perform test of control. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba?
Yes po.
Yes po.
Yes. All right. Now, if the internal control is bad, masaya kayo or malungkot?
Malungkot.
Malungkot.
Malungkot. Therefore, the control risk is high. Will you perform test of control? Yes or no?
Yes.
Will you perform test of control?
No.
Yes or no? Answer is no. Bakit? Kasi nga, mataas na nga yung control risk. Ibig sabihin, di ba, tatagalogin ko siya, yung internal control daw, hindi maganda. Kung hindi maganda ang internal control, masaya kayo or malungkot?
Malungkot.
Malungkot. Therefore, the control risk is high. Kapag mataas ang control risk, dapat ka pa bang mag-perform ng test of control? Answer is no. Kasi magsasayang ka lang ng oras. Alam mo na mataas ang control risk. Bakit mo pa ipe-perform yung test of control? Ano ba yung purpose ng test of control? To prove that the internal control is good. Diba? So kung magpe-perform ka ng test of control to prove that internal control is good, pero may idea ka naman na internal control is bad, nagsasayang ka lang ng oras. Nakukuha po ba? So, therefore, you don't need to perform test of control kapag hindi maganda ang internal control. Nakukuha po ba?
Yes
Nakakasunod
sir.
po.
Alright. Okay. So, dito na tayo sa control risk. Kanina, inherent risk, 100%. Control risk, ito yung dapat natin i-check. Nagigets po ba? Nakukuha po ba?
Opo.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Alright. Kapag maganda ang internal control, mababa ang control risk, you perform test of control. Magpe-perform ka ba ng substantive testing? Will you perform substantive testing kapag maganda ang internal control? Yes or no?
Yes.
Ikaw dito, ayan. Perform substantive testing. Perform ba? Will you perform? Yes or no? Answer is yes. You have to perform substantive test. Kasi yung substantive test, this is your additional procedure para masatisfy mo naman ang sarili mo na Oo, tama yung test of control na ginawa mo. So you will perform substantive test dito kapag maganda ang internal control. Paano kapag hindi maganda ang internal control? Will you perform substantive test?
Yes.
No.
Yes. The answer is yes. Bakit? Bakit ka magpe-perform ng substantive test? Eh hindi ka na nga nag-perform ng test of control noon. So therefore, dapat mag-substantive testing ka talaga. So mas required na mag-substantive testing ka, extensive substantive testing kapag hindi maganda ang internal control. Kapag maganda naman ang internal control, you are still required to perform substantive testing. Bakit? To support your findings in the test of control. Alright, nakakasunod po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes po,
Yes
sir.
po.
Alright, okay. So, yung test of control, ginagawa yon para masatisfy yung sarili ninyo bilang auditor kung talaga bang mataas or mababa ang control risk. While yung substantive testing naman, ginagawa naman ito ng auditor para masatisfy yung kinontrol ninyong detection risk. Yung pag pinababa ninyo yung detection risk, therefore, you will conduct more substantive testing. Kapag mataas ang detection risk, you will perform less substantive testing. Nakukuha po ba? Nakakasunod po ba?
Yes po.
Alright, okay. So, dito na tayo sa substantive testing sa dulo. Ayan. Lagay ko dito. Ayan. Papalitin ko muna. Ayan. Nature, extent, and timing. Ayan. Iyahin natin. Ayan. Nature, extent, and timing. Net. Kapag maganda ang internal control, mababa ang control risk, you will perform test of control to satisfy yourself na mababa nga talaga ang control risk, and you will perform substantive testing to support your findings in the test of control. Nature, more or less samples. More or less samples.
Less.
More or less samples, class. You will do less. Bakit less? Kasi nga, bakit less? Kasi, maganda na yung internal control. Diba? And in order to support your test of control by performing substantive testing, less samples na lang yung gagawin mo. Extent. Small or large samples. Small or large samples?
Small.
Small. Nakuha po ba? So, small. I mean, will you do the audit at interim or year-end? Will you do the audit at interim or year-end na?
Year-end po.
Answer here is interim. So, pwede ka pala mag-audit, hindi pa tapos yung financial year. Kasi maganda yung internal control. Therefore, magte-test ka, mag-conduct ka ng audit, hindi pa tapos yung taon, just to satisfy yourself na effective pa din, okay pa din yung internal control, nag-perform ka ng substantive testing, para pag year-end, pag in-audit mo na at year-end, onti na lang yung gagawin mo. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes po.
Alright. Dito naman, kapag hindi maganda ang internal control, hindi ka na magpe-perform ng test of control, therefore, diretso ka na sa substantive testing. Marami kang gagawin sa substantive testing kasi hindi ka na nag-test of control. Diba? So, nature, more or less. Nature, more or less?
More.
More. So, you will require more samples. Extent.
More.
Large, diba? And then, timing, interim or year-end?
Year-end.
Year-end ka na lang. Bakit year-end kaya? Kasi sa year-end, ma-audit mo na lahat, di ba? Kaysa naman mag-audit ka interim, tapos i-audit mo ulit yung sa year-end, di ba? Kaysa magkanda ka na lang ng year-end, i-audit mo rin naman lahat. Diba? Kapag hindi maganda yung internal control, mataas yung control risk, pababain yung detection risk by performing more substantive testing. Nakukuha po ba, class? Alas na lang to. So lilipat na tayo mamaya sa audit problem. So ito, lagyan natin ng shape. Yan. Control risk is 100%. Therefore, it is high. Diba? High siya. Kapag mababa siya, kapag mataas yung inherent risk, yung control risk hindi daw maganda. Kapag hindi maganda ang control risk, kapag hindi maganda ang internal control, yung control risk ba mataas or mababa? Class. Kapag hindi maganda ang internal control, ang control risk ba mataas or mababa?
Mataas.
Mataas. So, control risk is high. Therefore, ang audit risk ninyo, mataas yan. Pero syempre, ano bang sabi natin? Dapat ang audit risk must be at a sufficiently low level or acceptable level. So, dapat daw pala, ang audit risk mo ay mababa. Ayan. So, lagay natin dito, audit risk dapat mababa. So, para mapababa mo yan, ano yung dapat mong galawin? Sa tatlong risk, yung detection risk. Ayan. So, lagyan ko ng shape ng arrow. Ayan. So, yung detection risk dapat mababa. Ayan. So, yan yung inyong pwedeng galawin. So, syempre, balikan ulit natin. Dahil mababa ang detection risk ninyo, pag mababa ang detection risk ninyo, sabihin natin, audit risk is 5%. Audit risk is 5%. Inherent risk is 100%. Yung control risk is 80%. Ilan dapat ang detection risk natin? Ilan lang dapat ang detection risk?
6.25.
90% na lang ang control risk. Ilan dapat ang detection risk? Ilan dapat?
5.55.
Sige nga, 5.55%. Lagyan natin dyan, 5.55%. Computein natin. Kapag nahirapan kayo, kailangan ninyong i-apply yung mathematical arithmetics, di ba? Di ba itatranspose nyo lang yan? Ano bang hinahanap ninyo? Detection risk. So para makuha ninyo yung detection risk, i-transpose nyo itong dalawa. Itong inherent risk papunta sa kabila. Di ba? So paano ninyo ililipat sa kabila iyan? Dahil multiplication nito, magiging siyang division sa kabila. Tama po ba? So, let's test. Ayan. 100% multiplied by 90% multiplied by 5.55%. So, nakuha ninyo 5%. Ayan. Okay. So, pwede rin yung ganito, di ba? So, detection risk is equal to audit risk divided by inherent risk multiplied by control risk. So, yan. So, kung gusto nyo hanapin yung detection risk. Ganun din. Paglalaroan nyo lang yung inyong audit risk model. Dahil pinababa mo yung detection risk, diba? Dahil pinababa mo yung detection risk, yung substantive test na gagawin mo, dapat is ilang percent? Ilang percent yan? Yung substantive test mo. Supposedly 100% siya, di ba? Pero dahil may acceptable level lang kayo ng detection risk na 5.55, 94.45% ang substantive testing na gagawin ninyo. Nakukuha po ba, class? So dahil 94.45% substantive testing procedure ang gagawin ninyo, you will require more samples, large samples, and large population, and then you will perform it at year-end. Nakukuha po ba? Nagigets po ba, class?
Yes
Nagigets po
po.
ba? Ayan. All right. So any more question? Any more question? Audit program. So last na lang to, audit program. Anong meron sa audit program? Audit program is, ano po yung audit program? What is audit program, class?
A detailed list of audit procedures, sir.
Audit program is a, yes, it's a detailed list kasi nga documentation siya. So audit program is a documentation with the following items to consider. So ano yung mga dapat i-consider under audit program? Assessment, diba? Assessment of inherent risk and control risk na nakuha ninyo. Ano pa? Timing and timing of test of control. Timing of test of controls na ginawa natin and substantive procedures. Ayan. Ano pa? Coordination. Ayan. Coordination of any assistance from the client's staffs. Kasama rin yun doon. Ano pa? Availability. Availability of assistants. Involvement of other auditors or experts. And then number 6, other matters. Other matters to be considered in drafting the overall audit plan. Ayan. So that is the audit program. All right, class. So you can check our video kapag na-upload na natin itong audit planning. So we're done with the audit planning. Thank you so much for joining this class discussion. Let's go now with our audit of errors. All right, class. I'll see you again. Thank you.